direction. Around leaders' roles to set the direction, provide support, and develop yourself. So on the first, about setting the direction, we all know that we need to have like a direction or a challenge to move towards, but often, in my experience, in both when I worked internally at organizations and now with coaching and consulting with organizations around the world, more often than not, people in the organization don't really have a clear sense of what the top priorities of the organization are, or even what the clear next challenge or target should be. So this is really the leadership role in setting the direction, of providing a target, providing clarity in how everyone should orient their creative energy and problem-solving energy towards achieving. I've also found that I learned from this in talking from Mr. Yoshino, as well as my own personal experience, that sometimes we set targets because we think they are achievable, rather than what our customers actually need. Now, for example, I worked in healthcare for many, many years, and I can't tell you how many meetings that I was in where we talked about what's an okay level of harm or error rates for this year. Or what's the right sort of reduction in it. Maybe that's okay to have an incremental target for the next step to keep doing plan, do, study, adjust. But really our targets, our big challenge should be what the customer needs. Zero harm, zero errors in this instance. So think about, what does your customer need? Set that as the higher challenge and maybe work towards it smaller target by target. But don't let things like bonuses or compensation packages limit what you need to be doing for your customers. And Mr. Yoshino says one of the things that Toyota does very well is set those challenging targets, because getting back to this concept of the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning, is that it's what you learn by not achieving the target, by having a goal out there that he calls seemingly impossible, challenges you to think more creatively in how we're going to get there and how we're going to learn our way through there. So that's where we create that wisdom and get a little bit smarter. Okay, so the second one is around providing support. And this is really the richness of the stories of Mr. Yoshino's time at Toyota, cover so much of how leaders at all levels really created a culture of developing people, of supporting their learning, and creating this people-centered learning culture. And I'm going to share a few ways that he discovered that happening. And it's important to remember, as Mr. Yoshino says, that as leaders, as coaches, we do not control the development of other people. What we can do is provide the conditions for people to learn. And this is something with challenging people and nurturing them. So again, going back to this concept of setting a challenging target, what's pushing them into the little bit of the uncomfortable, it doesn't seem immediately possible, challenging them to do something else, but also providing support and nurture so that they're not like in the deep end of the pool without knowing how to swim yet. You meet them where they're at and allow them to learn and develop and create capacity and capability and confidence to be able to solve problems and do the work that they're assigned. So one way that leaders do this is to set the conditions for success and take responsibility for when mistakes happen. There's this really incredible story that Mr. Yoshino hadn't even thought of in over 40 years when we first started doing the interviews for this book. And it happened when he was a young man in his early 20s, actually during his orientation at Toyota, when he was assigned a role in the paint shop on the production floor. Even though he was going to have a back-end office job, Toyota really believed that all new employees need to have experience with actually producing cars and what the sort of the value-added work is. And he was assigned to be pouring a can of solvent and a can of paint into a big vat every few hours, and this would be then sprayed onto the cars as they came across the line. And one day, the shop floor manager ran in saying, the paint is not sticking to the cars. And they all looked at Mr. Yoshino, and he was not Mr. Yoshino at the time. He was Yoshino-kun, which means young Yoshino. But he had this sort of moment of panic of, oh my gosh, he realized he had made a really terrible mistake and that he had done something wrong. But instead of yelling at him, they asked him first to show them what he had done. And so he went and got the cans and demonstrated what he did. And then the manager said, "Thank you for making that mistake. We realize now that we did not properly label those cans, and it was easy for you to mistake the cans that you needed. So don't worry, that mistake is our fault because we did not set up the conditions for your work for you to be successful." And he laughed when he told me the story. He said, like, how amazing was that? And it really set forth for him the type of culture, he was excited to be working in that culture, but also what type of leader he wanted to be. One that didn't immediately blame, but instead looked at process and then realized that it was part of their role as managers to also be setting up a work environment so that people don't make mistakes, at least unintentionally. Managers and leaders also have the responsibility, for teaching the process of learning. So I consider this like coaches and leaders own creating the conditions for learning, but not the learning itself. So this is where, how do we not give all of the answers right away, but give space for people to think and give them some structure for the time to learn. For example, one time, Mr. Yoshino had to create a report, and he had learned from his years before. He's mid-career, probably his mid-late 30s at this time, and he was he was working in the Tokyo office, now in Japan, and he was asked by the head of the Tokyo office to write a report. And he had known that he should go to Gemba, which is a word for meaning the place that the work is done or the action happens. So in this case, go and interview some other people from different companies and gather the information from the first source. But he felt like he did not have time. And so instead, he just went to the library. And so he went ahead and stood up in front of the big boss, as he called them, in the big boss's direct reports to give his presentation and summarize his report. And the boss said, "How did you collect your information?" He said, "Oh, I only had time to go to the library." And the boss said, "Stop. You know that that's not the right way to collect information. You need to go talk to people to do the completeness of the thinking. I'll give you one more week." So Yoshino was a bit embarrassed, but he also knew that he was being taught how to learn and how to do things properly rather than just focused on the outcome of the report as well. He later learned, one, that he didn't learn anything new by going out and doing the interviews, and two, that was not the intention of his boss. His boss knew it was unlikely that the information was going to be any different. But what his boss was focused on was teaching him the process of being a better learner, to do a completeness of thinking, and teaching him in some ways how to be a better leader as well. One other thing that leaders and coaches can do is to always stay curious and not assume that our answer is the right answer. So we do this by asking questions and letting people learn. And it's about giving some space for learning. Sometimes we're so busy in our organizations that it feels faster to tell people what we believe to be the right answer. And sometimes we may be right, but we are also limiting creativity and ideas. And if our purpose is also to create a learning organization, so going back to that concept of intention, what are the actions we need to do to line our behavior in creating that learning organization? And one of the most effective ones is asking better questions. So again, and then developing yourself is the third element of leadership. And this is about never stopping learning and growing. So how are you always challenging yourself to be a better learner and a better leader so that you can be more effective in your organization? And I've certainly found that coaching and developing and leading other people is, for me, the best way to develop myself. It's really challenged me to become a better leader.